She thought I was just a quiet, broken kid she could get rid of while my dad was out of town. What she didn't know, I was recording everything. Stay with me, because by the end of this story you'll see how I turned her plan into her downfall. My name is Ethan Blake, and for most of my 17 years, I lived in a house that smiled on the outside but whispered behind the walls. We lived in a sprawling craftsman-style home in a quiet Boston suburb. Big kitchen, polished floors, fresh flowers that matched the seasons. If you drove by, you might think we were the kind of family that hosted Christmas card photo shoots and volunteered at the local shelter. In a way, we were. My father, Charles Blake, was a high-profile venture capitalist who believed in perfect lawns and tighter reputations. My mother, Clara, was an artist who painted skies like emotions, never quite the same shade twice. But she died. Ovarian cancer. Quick, cruel. It hollowed the house. My father tried to fill the space, tried to be both parents. But grief doesn't like to share. And then came Vanessa. She was beautiful. There was no denying it. Sharp green eyes, always dressed like she stepped off the cover of a home lifestyle magazine. She had a way of entering a room like she owned its silence. My father met her at a fundraising gala. 3 months later, they were married. She moved in, rearranged the furniture, repainted the kitchen, planted hydrangeas over my mother's rose garden. First I tried. I smiled. I called her Vanessa, not Mom but with respect. I helped carry boxes. I made small talk. She made me breakfast. But slowly the warmth became surveillance. Her eyes followed me too long. Her questions were always double-edged. Are you sleeping okay? You looked restless this morning. Or, that story you told your father, are you sure that's how it happened? I started second-guessing myself. Had I forgotten to turn off the stove? Did I leave my window open? Why couldn't I find the notebook I just had yesterday? It was little things. Always little things. Just enough to make me doubt my own mind. When I confronted her, gently, always gently, she'd tilt her head and smile. Ethan, I know this transition has been hard. Maybe you just need someone to talk to. My father didn't see it. He was charmed, grateful. She's trying so hard, Ethan, he'd say. You should meet her halfway. Halfway felt like a cliff. There were nights I'd lie awake in my room, staring at the ceiling, listening to the creaks of the house and wondering if they were footsteps. Once, I woke up to find my desk drawer open, my journal slightly moved. I told myself I was imagining it. I wanted to believe that. But then there was the tea. Vanessa started bringing me herbal tea in the evenings. Chamomile, lavender, always warm, always kind. I drank it. I didn't want to be rude. And then I started sleeping harder, heavier, waking up groggy, confused. Once, I slept through my alarm, missed school entirely. Another time, I woke up on the living room couch without remembering how I got there. When I brought it up, she smiled. Teenagers burn out, Ethan. Maybe you should cut back on screens before bed. I started writing things down. Every odd moment. Every misplaced item. Every time she asked me how I was feeling, with just enough concern to be unnerving. I hid the notebook inside the back panel of my closet. The house was no longer home. It was a stage, and I was starting to think I was the only one who didn't know my role. Then came the day my father sat me down in the living room. Vanessa stood beside him, hand on his shoulder. He looked uncomfortable, like he was trying to breathe through fog. Ethan, he said, clearing his throat. Vanessa and we've been talking. We think it might help if you spoke to someone. A professional. I looked at her. She didn't blink. It's not about punishment, she said. It's about understanding what you're going through. I didn't answer. Not then. But that night, I wrote in my notebook, in shaking hands. They want me to believe I'm broken. But what if I'm the only one seeing clearly? What they didn't know was that I had stopped being afraid. And I had started paying attention. It started with the medicine cabinet. One morning, I reached for my toothbrush and noticed a small amber bottle tucked behind the vitamins. It wasn't mine. I pulled it out. Lorazepam. prescribed under my name. I hadn't seen it before. I hadn't taken anything. And yet it was half empty. My hands shook. I placed it back exactly where I found it and closed the cabinet. I didn't mention it to Vanessa. Not yet. That week, my father started making casual comments at dinner. "Did you finish that book I got you?" "What book?" He frowned. "You said you started it last week." I hadn't. Or maybe I did. I couldn't be sure anymore. Vanessa would chime in softly, her voice sweet as syrup. "It's okay, Ethan. We all forget things when we're stressed." But I wasn't stressed. I was alert, hyper-aware. Every detail, every movement felt like part of a machine slowly turning around me. Soon, my father began asking questions like, "Have you been sleeping okay?" Or, "You seemed disoriented this morning." Always after Vanessa had a quiet word with him in the hallway. Once, I overheard them from the top of the stairs. "I'm worried about his moods," she whispered. "He's been withdrawn. Unstable. Unstable." The word stuck in my ribs like a splinter. I wrote it down. The next week, I found an email on the family computer, carelessly left open. It was from Vanessa to someone named Dr. Myers. Subject line, "Psychiatric Observation Protocol." The message was short. "He's exhibiting consistent signs. Emotional detachment. Paranoia. I believe the timeline can be accelerated." Accelerated. I took a photo of the screen. Then I cleared the browser history. She never mentioned it. I never confronted her. We both played our parts. Around this time, things began disappearing. A library book I'd renewed twice vanished from my backpack. My class notes were shredded in the trash. Accidentally, Vanessa said, while cleaning. She began suggesting things I'd said or done that never happened. "You shouted at me in the kitchen. You broke that picture frame in a fit. None of it was real." Gaslighting isn't loud. It's quiet. It's persistent. A drop of doubt each day until you drown. I started recording myself at night. Audio only. Sometimes I'd find whispers in the background. The door opening. Someone breathing close to the mic. I kept the recordings hidden on an encrypted drive. But the worst moment came the day I woke up with a bandage on my arm. "Just a scratch," Vanessa said, making tea. I didn't remember scratching myself. The gauze was clean. The smell of antiseptic lingered. I checked my notebook. My entry from the night before ended mid-sentence. Whatever she was doing, she was getting bolder. And that's when I made my decision. If she wanted me to look crazy, then maybe I'd give her exactly what she wanted. Just not for the reasons she thought. The first time I met Dr. Noah Carter, he looked like someone who didn't belong in our living room. Too young, too polished, too calm. He wore a navy suit with a gray vest, no tie, and a watch that ticked too quietly. His eyes were the kind that studied you before you even said hello. Vanessa introduced him with the pride of someone showing off a designer handbag. "Dr. Carter is one of Boston's top behavioral specialists," she said, her voice syrupy sweet. "He's worked with teens from elite prep schools and difficult backgrounds. I thought he might be able to help Ethan find clarity." My father nodded beside her, tired eyes hopeful. "Just a few sessions. Nothing official yet. Think of it as a conversation." Dr. Carter extended his hand. "It's good to meet you, Ethan." I shook it. His grip was steady. Mine was not. We met in the sunroom. Vanessa brought us lemonade and then retreated, though not without giving a long, assessing glance over her shoulder. The walls were glass. Too much light for honesty. But I had nothing to lose. He started gently asking about school, books I liked, movies I hated. I gave short, guarded answers. He didn't push. He watched. He listened like he was collecting pieces to a puzzle I hadn't noticed I was building. By the third session, I finally said it. "You know I'm not crazy, right?" He looked up from his notepad. "Why do you think someone wants you to believe you are?" I stared at him, and then I told him everything. Not all at once, but in pieces. The bottle in the cabinet. The tea. The gaps in memory. The email. The recordings. The staged outbursts. The voice that kept whispering. Maybe she's right. Maybe I am broken. Dr. Carter didn't interrupt. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair, silent for a long time. Then he said, "You're not broken, Ethan. You're being dismantled." That word struck harder than I expected. Dismantled. Like I was a machine, slowly taken apart one screw at a time. "I can't prove anything," I said. "Not yet." "You don't have to," he replied. "Because I can." He told me he believed me, not because he was paid to, but because he had seen it before, in other homes, other clients, other quiet wars waged inside perfectly manicured families. "But we have to be careful," he said. "If she suspects you're catching on, she'll act faster." I asked him what we could do. He paused. Then, almost reluctantly, he said, "There's another way, a dangerous one that requires acting." I raised an eyebrow. "She's trying to create a narrative. You're unstable, unpredictable, a risk to yourself and others. What if we fed that narrative just enough to shift her focus?" My pulse quickened. "What do you mean?" "Let her believe she's winning," he said, "while I get closer." I sat back. It sounded insane, like a psychological chess match, but it made sense. "She watches everything I do," I said. "She records my words in her head like she's building a case." "Then let's give her a new story," he said. "One where the therapist begins to cross lines. She won't be able to resist that." "Are you seriously suggesting seducing her?" I asked. He gave a dry smile. "I'm suggesting we exploit the one weakness manipulators always have, the belief that they are smarter than everyone else." I stared at him, feeling the air shift. "I don't want you getting hurt," I said. "She's good at this." "So am I," he replied. We shook hands before he left. But this time it wasn't a greeting. It was an agreement. Later that night, I sat in my room, listening to one of the older recordings. Vanessa's voice, soft and feigned concern. "He doesn't even know what's real anymore." I looked out the window, the moonlight slicing through the trees. She thought I didn't know, but I did. And now I had an ally. For the first time, I didn't feel crazy. I felt ready. Dr. Carter's next few visits were textbook, professional, composed, quiet enough to earn Vanessa's full confidence. She began dressing differently on the days he came. Softer blouses, a touch more perfume. She adjusted her hair before he arrived and offered him tea before me. And he played his role masterfully. He complimented her hydrangeas, asked about her reading tastes, smiled just enough to keep her curious. During one session, as he packed up his notes, he casually mentioned her eye for decor. Her smile lingered too long. "Ethan," she said the next morning over breakfast, "you're lucky to have someone so dedicated. Dr. Carter is very attentive." I didn't answer. I just buttered my toast, my eyes fixed on my plate. We were shifting the narrative, and she was walking right into it. By the 5th week, Noah and I had developed an unspoken rhythm. During our actual sessions, we'd speak in code, phrases loaded with double meanings. At one point, I said, "It's strange how sometimes the people who say they love you forget who you are." He nodded. "And sometimes, they only remember the parts they can control." That night, Vanessa knocked on his study door while he packed up. I watched from the hallway. She leaned in too close, said something I couldn't hear. He chuckled lightly, just enough to encourage without committing. Later, he texted me from a burner phone. "She's beginning to see me instead of you. That's our window." The goal was never to actually seduce her. It was to tempt her into exposing herself. Manipulators thrive in shadows. Our job was to turn on the light. We created moments, subtle opportunities. Noah accidentally left behind his leather notebook one afternoon, filled with fabricated reflections about Vanessa. Vague admiration, concern, curiosity. Enough to suggest something personal. Enough to get under her skin. She read it. I knew because the next day she wore lipstick to a therapy session. That same evening, I passed by her room and heard her humming. A love song. The kind my mother used to play. The irony wasn't lost on me. My father remained oblivious. Work had swallowed him again. Long nights, business trips, exhausted silence at the dinner table. If he noticed Vanessa's shift, he didn't say anything. One night, as Noah and I debriefed through coded text, I asked him, "What if she actually tries something?" His reply came quick. "Then we document it. You stay safe. I lead." And lead he did. A week later, Vanessa asked if he could stay late. She claimed she wanted to discuss Ethan's deeper triggers. Noah agreed. He set his phone to record before the session began. She closed the door behind them. What followed wasn't explosive. It was slow, calculated. She asked if he ever felt emotionally invested in his clients, if he believed in boundaries, if he was lonely. He kept the conversation neutral, guiding it like a slow dance, never giving her more than she offered, but always keeping her in motion. And then she touched his hand, just once. He didn't pull away. He didn't encourage. He simply noted the moment, changed the subject, and finished the session as if nothing had happened. But the recorder caught it all. Noah sent me the file that night. I listened with headphones, heart pounding. There was no overt seduction, no scandalous confession, but it was enough. Enough to show intention. Enough to expose the shift in power. And we weren't done. The next step was riskier. Noah proposed a staged conversation, one Vanessa wasn't meant to overhear. He would feign concern about getting too close, about lines blurring, and leave the study door cracked. She took the bait. The next evening, I watched her hover near the door, just out of sight, as Noah spoke into his phone. Loud enough for her to catch every word. "I don't know. She's magnetic. It's not professional. But sometimes it feels like she sees me in a way no one else does." I stood at the top of the stairs, watching Vanessa's expression. She smiled. She actually smiled. And in that moment, I knew we had her. Not in a trap. Not in a scandal. In a mirror. Because what manipulative people fear most is being seen. And we had made her visible. Not to the world. To herself. And that was only the beginning. We didn't rush the next phase. With people like Vanessa, the moment they sense they're being hunted, they vanish behind polished masks. So we moved quietly, slowly, intentionally. Noah began extending the sessions by 15 minutes. Sometimes they'd move from the sunroom to the kitchen, casually transitioning from therapy to tea. The shift was subtle, but I saw it happening. Vanessa leaned in more, laughed louder, rested her fingers on the countertop just close enough to his. He kept recording every session, every word. I created a secure drive and backed up everything daily. Redundant storage. Triple passwords. If things went south, I needed to be ready. One evening, Noah dropped a carefully rehearsed comment as he sipped tea beside Vanessa. "You ever feel like no one really sees you for who you are?" She exhaled, eyes slightly glassy. "All the time." He waited. She didn't elaborate. She didn't need to. That moment was the opening act. From then on, she lingered longer in the hall after sessions, brought out photo albums, talked about Charles and his long absences, about how hard it was to raise a teenager who wasn't hers, about how isolated she felt. "I'm just trying to hold this family together," she said one night. "Even when it feels like no one wants me here." The irony nearly made me laugh, but I stayed quiet. Noah responded with empathy, never flirtation. That was the trick. Let her write the fantasy herself. Then came the night she invited him to dinner. My father was in San Francisco for a tech conference. Vanessa insisted Noah stay after the session. "No point rushing home alone," she said. "Besides, you've been such a help. It's the least I can do." He agreed. Texted me 3 words afterward. "Camera. Kitchen. Tonight." I'd already installed the device. A tiny motion-triggered recorder disguised in a novelty cookbook spine on the shelf. From my room, I monitored the live feed on my laptop. Vanessa had lit candles, made salmon, wore a soft, wine-colored dress I'd never seen before. She poured a second glass of Pinot Noir before he asked. The conversation was casual at first. Family, career, childhood memories. Then it shifted. I bet women fall for you all the time, she said, swirling her wine. Noah smiled politely. It's not exactly professional to engage with clients beyond the office. I'm not your client, she replied. Silence. She leaned in. Tell me, Noah, have you ever crossed that line? He paused, perfectly timed. Only once. A long time ago. Vanessa's fingers touched his sleeve. Was it worth it? Another pause. Then softly, no, but I didn't regret it either. She laughed. Low, controlled. You're dangerous. He shook his head. No, just human. That was it. No kiss.
No declaración.
But the tension was thick enough to cut with a knife. And the camera caught it all, the glances, the physical proximity, the tone. Not definitive, but damning enough. Especially in context with everything else we had. Later that night, Noah sent me a clipped audio file. Her voice, just before he left. You're the only person I can be honest with. He texted alongside it. She's cracked. One more nudge. We planned a final stage, something undeniable. The next session, Noah brought her a book. A rare edition of a poetry collection she'd once mentioned liking.
No inscription.
No card. Just a gift. Unprovoked. Simple. Suggestive. She took it like it was proof. That same night, she came to my room. Ethan, she said, standing in the doorway. Dr. Carter thinks you're improving. I looked up from my desk. I feel the same. She nodded slowly. He's really helped this family. There was a pause. Her tone shifted. Softer. And I know I've been hard on you.
Esther here.
Wondered what version of herself she was selling now. I hope you'll understand someday that everything I did was out of love. I didn't respond. She left before I could. I opened the secure drive and uploaded the latest recordings. We had enough. More than enough. Now it was time for the next move. The trap had been set, and she had walked straight into it. The return of my father marked the beginning of the final act. He came back from San Francisco on a Sunday evening, suitcase in hand, voice hoarse from travel. Vanessa greeted him with her usual glow, kissed his cheek, offered him wine, and filled the kitchen with the illusion of normalcy. But something was different. She was radiant, triumphant, too much so. Noah had timed everything perfectly. I waited until Wednesday, just enough time for Vanessa to settle back into routine, for the mask to return to her face. That morning, I asked my father to meet me at his office after school. I told him it was about my college essay. He looked surprised, then pleased. When I arrived, I brought my laptop and a USB drive. No drama, just truth. He gestured toward the guest chair. What's this about, son? I sat across from him, calm but steady. There's something you need to hear and see. He furrowed his brow. Ethan, I handed him the USB.
No commentary.
Just press play. The first file was audio. Vanessa whispering to Noah, late at night, telling him how lonely she felt, how much she trusted him, how hard it was to keep pretending. Then video, the dinner, the wine, her leaning in, fingers grazing his sleeve. My father's hands trembled as he adjusted the angle of the screen. Keep watching, I said. The next file showed her opening the book Noah had gifted her, tracing the cover with her fingertips like it meant something deeper. Then came the kitchen footage, her inviting him in, speaking in a low, suggestive tone. At the end, I let silence settle. I know it's a lot, I said finally, but this isn't about jealousy or rebellion. It's about truth. He didn't say anything, just sat there, eyes on the screen, breath shallow. I waited. When he finally spoke, his voice was raw. How long have you known? Since before the therapy started, I said. Since the gaslighting, the manipulation, the medication I didn't consent to. His head snapped up. Medication? I nodded. Lorazepam, prescribed under my name. Half the bottle gone before I even knew it existed. He leaned back, rubbed his temples.
Jesus Christ.
I didn't come here to hurt you, I said. I came because you deserve to know who's in your home. what she's capable of. He didn't cry. My father was never the emotional type. But I saw something in his face crack. Something old, rigid, and proud. You should have told me sooner, he said. I didn't think you'd believe me. He closed his eyes. And that's on me. He stood up, poured himself a glass of water with trembling hands. So, what do we do? I pulled out a folder. Inside a timeline, dated logs, transcripts, backup links to the encrypted drive. I've documented everything, I said. She doesn't know, you know. That's our leverage. He flipped through the papers. Read the timestamps. Saw her betrayal laid bare in ink and logic. We get legal involved, I said. Quietly, cleanly. No confrontation until we're ready. He looked up at me, and for the first time in years, I saw pride. Not the kind you give a straight-A student, but the kind you give someone who fought alone and didn't give up. I'm sorry, he said, for not seeing it, for not seeing you. That nearly broke me, but I nodded, because there was still more to do. That evening, Charles Blake came home and kissed his wife on the cheek like always. But his eyes, they had changed. He was no longer blinded by charm. He was watching. And Vanessa, though she didn't know it yet, was already cornered. Charles and I didn't speak much over the next few days. Not because we were avoiding each other, but because we were both quietly calculating our next move. He was a strategist by nature, decisive when necessary, cold if required. But this wasn't a business deal. It was his home, his wife, his son. It made him slower. I, on the other hand, had waited long enough. On Friday evening, Noah joined us for one final session. It was the only one we would all be in the room for. Vanessa had requested it. I think it would help, she'd said earlier that week, her tone delicate, to have the three of us align. Clear the air. Charles agreed, and so did I. She didn't know we were walking into her last performance. The session started civil. Forced pleasantries. Noah took his seat with his usual calm. Notebook open but ignored. Charles sat beside me. Vanessa across from us. For a moment, it felt like a polite negotiation. Then Noah said, "Ethan, do you feel safe in this home?" The silence that followed was thick. I looked at Vanessa. She smiled, confused, maybe even amused. "I do now," I said. Charles cleared his throat. "There's been a lot going on. Too much swept under the rug. I think it's time we put everything on the table." Vanessa shifted. "Charles, I thought this was about healing." "It is," he cut in. "And healing starts with truth." Noah leaned forward. "Vanessa, do you mind if I share something from my notes?" She hesitated. "Of course not." He pulled out a small recorder from his jacket. "I'd like to play something first." He pressed play. Her voice filled the room. "You're the only person I can be honest with." Then another clip. "I bet women fall for you all the time." Then another. "Tell me, Noah, have you ever crossed that line?" Vanessa froze. "What is this?" she whispered. Charles looked her in the eye. "It's you, on tape, saying things no married woman should be saying to her stepson's therapist." "No, this is out of context." "There's more," I said, opening my laptop. "Much more." I played the footage. The dinner, the wine, the hand on Noah's sleeve, the smile. Vanessa stood abruptly. "This is manipulation. You tricked me." Charles stood too. "You drugged my son." She stammered. "I was trying to help. He needed something to sleep. I didn't think." "You didn't think he'd notice," I said. "You didn't think I'd remember. But I did." She stepped back. Her mask crumbled. The tears that came were not from guilt. They were from being caught. Charles spoke again. "I've contacted legal. The divorce papers are being finalized. Your access to the estate is being revoked." "You can't do that," she snapped. He looked at her with something like pity. "I already did." She turned to Noah. "You used me." He nodded. "And you let me." Vanessa's shoulders slumped. She looked at me last. "You'll regret this." "No," I said. "I'll finally sleep." She left that night. Bags packed.
No goodbyes.
We didn't celebrate. There were no high fives. Just stillness. But it was a different kind of stillness. One that finally felt safe. The silence that followed Vanessa's departure wasn't just the absence of noise. It was the release of tension that had lingered in every hallway, every dinner, every forced smile. I didn't know how heavy she had made the air until she was gone, and it felt like we could breathe again. But breathing doesn't mean healing. The next morning, I came downstairs to find Charles in the kitchen, staring into a coffee mug like it held the answers he never asked for. He looked older, like he'd aged 5 years overnight. "Sleep okay?" I asked. He didn't look up. "Not really. You?" "Same." We sat in silence for a few moments. Then he said, "I feel like I don't even know the house I live in." I understood. I felt the same way. Everything had shifted. Not just the facts, but the foundation. What we had called family was never real. Not in the way we thought. And that's a kind of grief no one prepares you for. That afternoon, I packed up Vanessa's remaining things and left them in the garage. Charles didn't stop me. He didn't offer to help either. Some tasks need to be done alone. The days that followed blurred. School, meals, sleep. Noah checked in a few times, but I could sense he was already stepping back, letting us reassemble on our own terms. One night, as Charles and I were eating takeout on the porch, he said something I hadn't expected. "You were right to do what you did." I nodded slowly. Took me a long time to believe I had the right. He looked at me. "I let someone else define who you were. I see that now. And I'm sorry." I didn't know what to say. The apology was real. But so were the years it had taken to arrive. "I didn't do this to punish you," I said. "I just didn't want to disappear." He exhaled. "You didn't. You're here. You're louder than ever." We laughed. It wasn't much, but it was something. A week later, we met with the estate lawyer. I watched Charles update the will, remove Vanessa's name, and designate a trustee account for my future. It was the first time I felt like my place in this family was protected, not just by law, but by choice. In the evenings, we started cooking simple meals. Spaghetti, stir-fry, pancakes for dinner on Sundays. Nothing fancy, just us trying again. Sometimes, I still checked the cameras out of habit. Then I'd catch myself and shut the laptop. The threat was gone. The danger had passed. But the echo remained. Trauma doesn't vanish with a door slam. It lingers. Still, I was learning how to live with it. On the night of the first real storm since she left, I sat on the porch listening to the rain. Charles joined me after a while. We didn't talk much, just watched the lightning. Let the thunder fill the silence we no longer needed to fill with explanation. Eventually, he said, "You saved this family." I shook my head. "No. I just stopped pretending." He didn't argue, and that, more than anything, told me he understood. We still had a long way to go. There were trust gaps, scars, spaces where warmth had once lived. But we had something we hadn't had in years. A beginning, not a reset, a rebirth. And this time, no one was invisible. No one was forgotten. We were building something new from truth, not illusion. Brick by honest brick. Spring arrived quietly, as if the world, too, was ready to begin again. The trees outside our house bloomed soft green. The morning air no longer carried the tension of secrets. Even the walls inside felt warmer, less like they were holding their breath. Charles started leaving early again, but this time not to escape the house. He was rebuilding his consultancy, taking fewer clients, spending weekends home. He made breakfast some mornings. Not perfectly, burnt toast, runny eggs, but it was the effort that mattered. One Sunday, we tackled the attic together. A space long abandoned, filled with boxes of memories and dust. We found old photo albums, forgotten toys, even my kindergarten drawing portfolio. "Looks like I peaked early," I joked, holding up a stick figure family labeled in crayon. Charles laughed, but then his voice softened. "You used to draw a lot." "I stopped when no one hung them on the fridge anymore." His silence was heavy. That night, he bought a corkboard and put it up in the kitchen. He called it the Wall of Becoming. Anything I created, stories, sketches, even scraps of half-thoughts, he pinned up without comment, just so I could see it, just so he wouldn't forget. I kept writing. Noah wrote me a letter before he left for a new assignment. Something quiet in Oregon. You reminded me why I got into this work, it said, and why sometimes justice doesn't roar. It whispers. But that whisper can still change everything. I never replied, but I kept the letter. The school I felt lighter, not because anything outside changed, but because I had changed. I no longer walked with the weight of being unseen. I sat at lunch without apologizing for taking space. I submitted my writing to national contests. I started a school blog, anonymous at first, then under my own name. My English teacher nominated me for a regional storytelling award. When I won, Charles attended the ceremony in a navy blazer he hadn't worn since my middle school play. After I gave my speech, he hugged me with both arms. The kind of hug that says, "I see you now." He even got teary. The moment after, he whispered, "Your mom would have been proud." We didn't talk about her much, my birth mother. She had died when I was 6. Vanessa had filled the space too quickly, and grief had been buried under convenience. But now that the noise was gone, we started talking about her again. Slowly, carefully, he showed me old photos, told me stories I hadn't heard, like how she used to sing to me before bed, or how I used to mimic her laugh when I was little. Felt like meeting her again, through his eyes. One Saturday, we visited her grave, just the two of us. We brought wildflowers. He told her everything, quietly, as if she could hear us. And I stood there, not as a boy who had lost something, but as a young man who had reclaimed something. My story, my voice, my name. That evening, I wrote a new journal entry. Not a list of grievances, not a map of pain. Just this: I was almost erased, but now I live in bold print. It wasn't about vengeance anymore. It wasn't about proving them wrong. It was about proving to myself that I could survive being overlooked and come back brighter. Not all stories need villains to be powerful. Some just need someone who refuses to disappear. And I refused. This was my new legacy. Not silence, but story. Not fear, but freedom. You never really know where a story ends, only where it decides to pause. Months had passed since the chaos unraveled, and life, as it does, moved forward. But there are moments I return to in my mind, not because they haunt me, but because they remind me of who I've become. One afternoon, I was invited to speak at a local community youth forum. The theme was redefining strength. I almost declined, but something told me this was the place where my voice could echo further than my pain. I stood on stage that evening in front of strangers and mentors, teachers and kids like I used to be. Too quiet, too invisible, too much doubt wrapped in not enough. I told them everything. Not names, not specifics, but truths. I told them about silence, about manipulation disguised as love, about how healing isn't a single act, but 1,000 small ones, about how surviving doesn't mean forgetting, it means remembering with purpose. When I finished, the applause wasn't loud, but it was steady, real, a slow rise like the sunrise itself. After the talk, this was what all the pain had been for. Not revenge, not even justice, but resonance, a ripple, one voice becoming a bridge for another. That night, I walked home in the crisp air.
No headphones.
No distractions, just the sound of my own footsteps. And I thought about legacy again, not the kind etched into wills or carved into family trees, but the kind that lives in echoes, the kind that whispers, "You mattered, you changed something, you spoke." Sometimes I wonder what might have happened if I hadn't overheard that conversation outside my father's office. If I had stayed silent. If I had accepted their version of me. But I didn't. And now, every time I see a quiet kid at the edge of the room, I smile, because I know what silence hides. Strength. I leave you with this. Don't wait for permission to exist. Don't wait to be called on to speak. Don't wait for the world to validate your truth. Be the whisper that shakes the room. Be the stillness that breaks the cycle. Be the name they remember, not because you shouted, but because you endured. And when you can be that for someone else, that is what I've learned. That is the story. That is the message.